This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. Welcome to our podcast of the Security Studies Roundtable held on April the 9th, 2013, just a few days after the French Army announced that, contrary to previous expectations, they would not be leaving Mali anytime soon. North African scholar Dr. Andrew McGregor, head of Aberfoyle Security Company of Toronto and senior editor of the Global Terrorism Analysis Program of the Washington, D.C.-based Jamestown Foundation, speaks to us on the topic of the military challenge in North Africa, players and peacemakers.
Thanks very much, Chris. Took me a long time to make all that up, so I appreciate it. My apologies to anybody who was wondering where I was earlier. There was a subway breakdown, but I did make it in time. So I'm going to just go through some visuals here. I'm not going to try to explain the entire conflict in Mali and Northern Africa because I'm sure we'd get kicked out over the week it would take to go through all this. But I'm going to try to talk about personalities, some of the groups and players, individuals, to kind of give you a sense of what's going on there and at least some idea of the complexity of the problems that we're experiencing in Mali right now. So the important thing to know to begin with in Mali is just what an artificial construct it is. And this is really the source of the problems, not just in Mali, but in so many African countries where when the European powers pulled out, what were formerly provinces in larger territories wound up being countries. And we can see the deep blue part there is actually what was known as French West Africa, and it was just divided up into separate areas, but all these various administrative territories actually became independent countries, regardless of the viability of their borders. And this has created no end of problems. Give you a bit of an idea about the geographical space of Mali. It is, you can see some of the problems right away just by looking at the country. This is a very odd-shaped place. Basically, it's two nations with a dividing line just along there. In the north, you have Sahel and Sahara climate and conditions, and populations such as Arabs and Tuareg and some local African tribes that are used to those kind of conditions. And then in the south, you get more into forested area, heavily populated areas, black African tribes, mainly the Bambara and Mande. And they live almost completely different lifestyle from the folks in Mali. So you've really got two different nations going. And I should mention about 80% of the population is in that southern area. So these are people that really didn't even know each other until they got thrown together in 1960 with independence. This is a bit better map. Once you start getting rid of the administrative lines, you can start to see the real condition of the place. You have the major cities, Gao and Kidal, up there, and you can see that they're on the verge of the Sahara, and you can see all the Sahel area around here, grasslands, a bit of forest, and then you get in the rainforest down in the further part, the southern part of West Africa. So that gives you a bit more idea of the kind of terrain. The main people to know, to understand this conflict, is the Tuareg. And they're people that very few individuals really understand in the West. There's been so much written about them, but a lot of it is just completely unreliable or false or romanticized to some degree. There's all kinds of various stories going on about the Tuareg. Some people like to say they're the last survivors of Atlantis. Other people like to say that they were crusaders who got lost in the desert. This is mainly because they one of their favorite emblems is the cross. But in fact, the cross to them means the four directions. But nobody bothered asking them before they came up with these crazy theories. And you can see, just in this picture, the men, of course, wear the veil in Tuareg society. And the original Tuareg were very light-skinned, as you can see with a couple of these individuals. Over the years, as these folks have moved south from the Mediterranean coast, they mix more with Arab populations, or African populations. And so within the Tuareg today, you can see a wide variety of wide range of skin tones. And again, this is kind of misunderstood, because the lowest level of Tuareg society is what's called the black Tuareg, who are in fact black Africans who've been absorbed by the Tuareg as their slaves. They do all the agricultural work, while the upper classes of the Tuareg get to roam around in the desert with their camels and drive their flocks around, which is their favorite thing to do. But within the Tuareg themselves, you don't get a class system based on skin color. It's paternal descent that decides your importance. And just to point out, Berbers and the Tuareg, who are part of the Berber family, are an indigenous group of people. And this is a picture of some Berbers from ancient Egypt. They at various times cooperated with the Egyptians. Sometimes they were in conflict with the Egyptians. They actually took over ancient Egypt for a couple of hundred years at one point. But the Egyptians were very impressed by their sense of style and the fact that they had tattoos, which you can see here on their legs and arms. Tattooing for men has gone by the wayside, but Berbers today, it's the women who tattoo themselves. And you can see this young lady here has the actual symbol of the Berber race tattooed right on her face there. And this is what happened to the Berbers. They once controlled all of North Africa, especially the fertile areas along the Mediterranean coast. After the Arab invasions, most of the Berbers were absorbed into the larger Arab community. But some small groups, especially in faraway places and mountain areas, have survived to this day. And we can see just the area around Damas. The Berbers there were very important in the Libyan revolution. And you see some other areas. The only place where they're really of some significance in numbers today is Morocco. You can see up here in the northwest. And you can see the Tuareg. They moved down into the interior about 1,500 years ago, and since became cut off from the rest of the greater Berber family. And you can see their area down here. Green. Lovely Tuareg lady there. Good example of the kind of power that Tuareg women wield in their society. It's matrilineal. Most of those flocks I was talking about actually belong to the women. And they have very high social status, unlike Arab societies. It's just one more thing that makes them very different from Arabs. In fact, their entire origin story involves a Berber princess coming down from Morocco and settling into the Sahara region. Her tomb is actually still there. The French sent this crazy expedition there to open it up in 1923. They had all these special Peugeot desert cars with 8 wheels and machine guns mounted on the front to drive into the interior of the Sahara. They were expecting a lot of opposition from the Tuareg, and they were basically going to gun them down if they tried to prevent them from opening this tomb. And that's the way archaeology used to be done.
Effective.
And once again, just to show that they are very different from the Arabs, this is their script. You can see it's nothing like Arabic. It actually goes back to the ancient Punic script that came through Phoenicia and Carthage. Just more proof of their very ancient origins in North Africa. And as I note there, most Tuareg now speak French and Arabic as kind of lingua francas that allow them to do business with other communities. And while we look at great big desert wastes, this is how the Tuareg and the other people of the desert see the desert. They see it as a series of roads and trade routes that connect the coast to the interior. And it's always been control of these trade routes that has really given the Tuareg a lot of power and wealth over the years. Today, these routes are used largely for smuggling. There's a lot of legitimate traffic goes through, of course, but still controlling these routes enables whoever controls them to make a lot of money, especially through narcotics trafficking, which has become a big problem. Most of it comes in from South America through Guinea-Bissau and heads up through Mali, through the north of Mali, and then up into the coast where it can be shipped on into Europe. And this is one of the reasons that Al-QAEDA in the Islamic Maghreb became very involved in northern Mali, was to try to control the narcotics trafficking. They were making quite a bit of money from that. And you can see there's a Tuareg heading through with his camels, and that's the life of the Tuareg. And you see what happened. I was talking about what happened after the colonies kind of fell apart. And you've got the Tuareg nation, such as it is, being divided between all these other modern nation states. This is something that's absolutely a big problem for the Tuareg, not something they desired at all, but again, nobody asked them what they thought about these plans. They didn't have this problem while it was all one big French colony. They weren't divided from each other, but of course, with modern nation states, they don't always get along, and they've got their own programs and agendas, and they really feel the Tuareg are just kind of an impediment to furthering these programs. I should mention, we should not ever try to think of the Tuareg as having some kind of monolithic approach to security or any other problem. They tend to be quite fractious amongst themselves. So anytime you have a Tuareg, say, fighting for independence, there'll be another Tuareg fighting for the sovereignty of the state against that person. So we have to recognize there's incredible divisions just within this community themselves. And here's a good example. This is the group that started all the trouble a year ago, January, the National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad. This is a secular group with a separatist agenda. They want to divide northern Mali and create a state called Azawad. They're completely secular with an ethno-nationalist bent. Quite different from some of the other groups that appeared just a few months later. There's their emblem. Most of the members of the MNLA were actually in Gaddafi's army, and there's a photo there of some of them during the fighting. Still veiled, of course, but Gaddafi always prized them as fighters and tried to create a military outfit called the Islamic Legion back in the 70s that was formed around a Tuareg corps. And some of these individuals were actually sent to Lebanon to fight the IDF. One such individual is this fellow, IYAD GHALI. He's had quite a career, a bit of a very interesting person. Started off in the Islamic Legion, fought in Chad, in Lebanon, and then returned to his home in Mali and started a revolution up in the north. First of two or three that he led, all unsuccessful, but each time the Tuareg have returned to the field, they returned with greater arms and more determination. And he took advantage of a lot of the arms that were being brought down with the former Tuareg members of Gaddafi's army. When Libya fell apart, they brought all their weapons with them in large convoys into northern Mali. Most of these weapons were retained by the MNLA, the secular group, but a lot of them wound up in the hands of this fellow's group, which is called Ansar ad-Din. And this is an Islamist group. Very unusual for the Tuareg, who practice kind of very moderate kind of Sufi Islam with a lot of holdovers from pre-Islamic days. GHALI fell under the influence of Pakistani missionaries from a group called Tablighi Jamaat. They're active all over the world. A large number of them went to Mali at one point and tried to convert Arabs and Tuareg. Not very successful. The Tuaregs mostly weren't interested, but IYAD was very interested. And then he was sent as a diplomat, I think just to get him out of the country for a while. They sent him as a diplomat to Saudi Arabia, which was probably a bad idea because he went and met all the leading Islamists there and the Salafists, and came back to Mali with a lot of new ideas about religion and what the state should be, which in his version of things, it should be an Islamic state, nothing else. He aligned himself with Al-QAEDA in the Islamic Maghreb, and there were a lot of, there was a point last year when negotiations were going on. He was a bit fed up with Al-QAEDA. He was trying to take over the entire movement in northern Mali, and he was involved in negotiations, top-level negotiations, to bring about a peace settlement. And I just included a quote there from one of his spokesmen when it looked like the movement was actually, last November, ready to renounce terrorism and back off from any kind of involvement in drug trafficking or association with Al-QAEDA. These efforts came to an end a year ago, January, when he felt he wasn't getting a proper response from the Malian government. The Malian government basically was just holding out for time, knowing that a military intervention was being prepared. So instead of conducting serious negotiations, they were just playing them. And he realized this and started moving some of his troops south, which kind of precipitated the entire crisis that we've got going on now. This is a new movement, only a few months old. Of course, once the French and the Chadians and some of their allies began to push up into northern Mali, a lot of people who were in IYAD's group, Ansar ad-Din, decided that they didn't want to go down with that ship. And the Tuaregs have this incredibly well-honed survival skills. After 1,500 years in the Sahara, they have all kinds of means of preserving themselves, and changing sides is always a good way to do it. And you can always change sides back again in a few years when you're ready. And typically they wind up brought into the armies of Niger and Mali after an unsuccessful rebellion. They get well fed, they get new uniforms, they get, good training, sometimes from Western countries like Canada, and they get new arms, and then when they're ready, they go back out into the field and start a new rebellion. Or a coup. Coups are a bit out of the range for the Tuareg. They're not powerful enough for that. So this is a new group that was formed. This is kind of Ansar ad-Din light. It's or Al-QAEDA light. It's more moderate kind of Islamic approach. They're still against the Bamako government, but mainly this has provided a refuge for all those Ansar ad-Din fighters who didn't want to be chased around the mountains by the French. So now they're helping the French chase Al-QAEDA around the mountains, which they'll do for a while. And when the French pull out eventually, they'll still be there and well armed and ready to start the rebellion again. That's their leader, Al-Gabas, Al-Jintala. He's from the aristocracy of the Tuareg, and he's kind of a rival of IYAD GHALI, who tried to take over most of the aristocratic clans in northern Mali. Tuareg military tactics were always based on the sudden raid. They were very good at ambushing the French at many times. And kind of a funny story, like very often they'd wait for the French, and they'd catch them out in the desert, especially when they were camped, and wipe them out over and over and over again. And every time they did this, they kind of were satisfied, well, that's it. That's the last we've heard of the French. Because there were only a few 100,000 Tuareg, and they figured the French must be the same. There could only be a few thousand of them, and surely we've killed them all by now, and we must have heard the last of them. And they just didn't realize, well, there was about 35 to 50 million French at the time, this incredible modern industrial European nation, and they just couldn't conceive of this. And eventually folded up about 1902 as far as trying to defeat the French. They don't practice defensive warfare very much, so it wasn't very surprising that they pulled out of the cities as soon as the French and their allies approached. And that's their home. If you want to go up there and fight them, good luck to you. They know every inch of it. Very few people know any of it. The Malian army especially has had disaster after disaster up there. Most of the conscripts have never been up in desert conditions, and they wind up either getting slaughtered or just surrendering in large numbers. Mainly they just want to go home. This is what we had until the intervention began. You can see that northern part of the country was roughly divided into 3 units to keep all the Islamists happy. You had Timbuktu under Al-QAEDA, right there, Kidal under our friend IYAD and Ansar ad-Din, and the Gao region was under a group called the Movement for Unity and Justice in West Africa, which I'll just call MUJWA from now on. And they're another fairly new group. Some dissidents from Al-QAEDA created that, mainly as a means of trying to bring more Africans into the Islamist armed movement. So we all know Al-QAEDA. This is the local branch, Al-QAEDA in the Islamic Maghreb, basically Algerian. And one wing of their movement started penetrating further and further into the Sahara, which was very untraditional territory for the Algerian Islamists till about a decade ago. But they were very successful there, considering a virtual vacuum of security in the region. They were able to exploit this and make incredible amounts of money through kidnapping operations, narcotics trafficking, and carrying out attacks on various garrisons in the desert, in places like Mauritania and northern Mali, southern Algeria. Al-QAEDA has very little appeal to the Tuareg. Tuareg are not really interested in global jihad or spreading Islam throughout the world. They're mainly interested in controlling their own territory. So that's why you had the formation of these independent Tuareg Islamist groups rather than everyone just flocking to join Al-QAEDA. And you also have this kind of racial ethnic tension too. Al-QAEDA is Arab, and the Tuaregs and Arabs have never really gotten along. And I don't think any Tuaregs would really be very interested in joining any group where they had the privilege of being ordered around by Arabs, or vice versa. So hence we get these separate groups. Now, when they tried to set up this new Islamic State in northern Mali, this created a military problem for Al-QAEDA and the other Islamists, in that all their tactics, all their success up to this point, have been based on mobility. And of course, once you take over a city and decide to defend it, your mobility's gone. You don't have the resources for proper defense, nor do you have any experience in defensive warfare, or for that matter, most of the Tuareg and Arabs of the area have no experience in urban warfare either. Few of the Tuaregs might from their Libyan experience, but it's just not their home ground. And so it was no surprise that when they were put under some pressure by advancing French and their allies, they pulled out very quickly back into the desert and the mountains where they feel more at home. There's the group I was mentioning just a moment ago, MUJWA. Formation of this group, the idea was to bring in more black Africans from West Africa by appealing to traditions of jihad that existed in that area, going back some couple hundred years. The problem is that all the leadership of the movement still remains either Mauritanian, such as HAMADA Wad KHAIROU, or Arab, like Omar Wad Hamaha. So this has caused problems within that movement. Basically, they had one senior black African commander from Niger. He quit the movement last November, saying that all the leaders were racist and they were just using the blacks for cannon fodder. So you have these ethnic and racial divisions going on even within the Islamist movement. There's public enemy number one, MOKHTAR MOKHTAR, famous recruiter of young kids from London, Ontario, for suicide missions. Right now, whereabouts unknown. It's my guess that he's in southern Libya right now, and very far from Mali. He was based right up on the Algerian border, right up to the time of the attack on INDIGENOUS, the gas facility you see marked on the map up there. An Algerian Arab, once again, but often at odds with the rest of the Al-QAEDA leadership. He made a lot of money through kidnapping and smuggling, to the point that Al-QAEDA was getting very worried that he had basically turned his brigade into a criminal operation rather than an Islamist revolutionary group. So they sent a couple people down to have a little talk with him and straighten things out. And possibly the big attack on the gas facility was a way of reestablishing his credentials as an Islamist commander. The French now, of course, are big players in Mali again. They first took it over in 1894, basically through an act of military insubordination. Paris wasn't interested in Mali, had no interest in Timbuktu, told all their officers specifically not to advance into the interior, and they just went ahead anyways. Because at that point, the only way to get ahead in French military was to find a war, participate in it, gain a few victories, and get your promotions and medals. Otherwise, you were stuck doing garrison duty in France. That's how Mali became part of the French Empire, and might be on its way to a new kind of neo-colonial status at the moment. You see some of the rather spectacular country there. Nice to look at, but of course a bit dangerous for ambushes, which be the main concern of the people going through there. French Air Force, very active. They've been quite effective with airstrikes using mainly Mirage jets. They initially brought a few down from their base in N'Djamena in Chad, but they've now brought new warplanes down from metropolitan France. Very active in that sense. And up in KHAIROU, where IYAD is from, in the Ansar ad-Din group, you have the remains of the original French occupation of the old French Foreign Legion fort. Like a lot of these forts, it's been used as a prison more recently. Some burned out APCs. A lot of APCs and armored equipment was captured by the Islamists when they took over a year ago, but mainly they didn't know how to work it, and a lot of this stuff just sat parked or got burned out, such as this. And you can't have a colonial war without the Foreign Legion, and one of the main regiments active at the moment is the 2nd Regiment of Foreign Legion paratroopers. You can see their emblem and their colors. And you see one of the paratroopers there already adopting a bit of local color into his uniform, a bit of a Legion tradition. They've suffered a number of casualties so far. They've been involved in some of the heaviest fighting up in the mountains in KHAIROU. The other main force involved with the French on the ground are what's known as the Troupes de Marine. This is the old colonial army. The French army used to be divided basically into two parts. You had the Metropolitan Army, the main force, which was always based in France, and while they had conscription, all the conscripts went into the Metropolitan Army. Volunteers could join what was called the Troupes de Marine. They're called that not because they're Marines, in the sense that they're amphibious troops, but that this army came under the control of the Ministry of Marine, in other words, the Naval Ministry. And so you had two different powers controlling French military operations, one for Europe and one for overseas. One of their old recruiting posters there. So they're very involved in that. They saw a lot of action in Afghanistan, as did the Foreign Legion. And anywhere France has interests overseas or is called on to make one of these interventions, you can usually find the Troupes de Marine heavily involved. And just a bit of local color back when the French were running these, called the MAGHREB, camel patrols. Mostly Arab troops involved in these. Not many Tuareg were interested in serving with the French military. There were a few, but mostly they kept to themselves and waiting for the day that the French might leave. Now, the biggest allies of the French have been the Chadians. The Chadians basically reinvented desert warfare in the 1970s, 1980s, when they were fighting against Libyans who were trying to occupy the north part of Chad, which is where all the uranium was to be found. And Gaddafi at the time was very interested in mounting a big program to develop nuclear weapons. So they developed new strategies of mobility, especially using land cruisers with weapons mounted on the back, Now this is almost a kind of ubiquitous thing, but they were the first to use these, and they were constantly winding up behind the Libyan lines, surprising the Libyans, and eventually forced them out. They had a bit of assistance in that with some Jaguar jets of the French Air Force and some French legionnaires who were basically operated in disguise as Chadians. So this was the country that really had to be called on if the African part of this intervention was to have any success. Bringing troops up from West Africa, it's just repeating the Malian experience all over again. You needed experienced desert fighters. Algeria didn't want any part of this war, still doesn't want any part of it. The Mauritanians are not too bad at desert warfare, but small numbers, poor equipment. The Chadians really are the most capable in North Africa at this type of fighting. And they've had a lot of success up in northern Mali, but some defeats as well. There's been 2 notable ambushes where they took very large losses. The Army of Mali, which is not involved in the fighting up in Kidal, is part of the very strange politics of this whole conflict. The TUAREGs that was mentioned before, belonging to the MNLA and the MIA, are both working with the French to find Al-QAEDA. So yesterday's Islamists have become today's allies, and their condition for helping the French find their former buddies in Al-QAEDA is to keep the Malian army out of their territory. So you have this strange situation going on where you have an international military intervention in northern Mali, and the only people who aren't allowed to participate are the Malians. And probably for good reason. Their army is completely disorganized, and they've been accused of a number of atrocities in the behind-the-lines areas where they have been allowed to operate in northern Mali. The army's really been split ever since the coup in March. We can see the leader there in the light uniform. Captain Amadou Sanogo was the coup leader, virtually unknown individual before the coup. He's not involved in the fighting at all. He's still parked in the military base at Keiti, outside of Bamako, where he is essentially running the country unofficially. But he's there with a large number of troops that are loyal to him, and they have not gone out to do any fighting themselves. These special forces, known as Red Berets, in Mali, these were the best troops, received the most training from Western sources, especially the United States. They acted also as the presidential guard. And they were not interested in the military coup. They saved the president and got him out of the country, and then tried to mount a counter coup a couple of months later, which was a bit of a disaster. A lot of them were killed, some of them in prison, such as Colonel Guindo, and the rest of them wound up in a base outside of Bamako, where they were not involved in the fighting until just about 2 weeks ago, when they finally came to an agreement with the rest of the Malian army, and they're now being deployed up in northern areas. There's a couple of hard men. The one on the left, Colonel Wadmedu, is an Arab from the BERBERS tribe in northern Mali. He operates an Arab militia that's loyal to the government. He's also not involved in the fighting because he's considered to be an enemy of Captain Sanogo, who led the coup, and he's still under detention in Bamako. So basically, the northern Malians are keeping some of their best fighters out of the conflict at this point because of political purposes. On the right, you've got Colonel Haj Ajgamu, who is a Tuareg. He's also pro-government. He was, when the rest of the Malian army collapsed last year in March, he was caught behind the lines with about 500 of his men, all Tuareg of the UNIGAD tribe. And again, their survival skills are remarkable. He went up to Al-QAEDA and said, you know what, I've been thinking about this, and we're going to join you guys. And he took all his men in, and he said, okay, we're going to form a new brigade, but I don't want to be mixed with your existing brigades. We want to have our own Tuareg Al-QAEDA brigade. And they said, okay. And he moved them through the Al-QAEDA lines up to the Niger border, crossed the border into Niger, and then took refuge there with all his men and waited 9 months until the French and the Chadians came through, and then he joined up. So, in fact, these are the only northern Malians fighting Al-QAEDA at the moment. It's the force under Colonel Chigamu. And basically they're fighting without the authority of Bamako. He just took his troops back into the country when the French and the Chadians entered. Both of those guys are well known for strong arm tactics, if you want to put it that way. They've always felt the best way to take care of rebellions is to knock a few heads together. And they've had a lot of success working together, such as in 2009 when they drove Tuareg rebels right out of the country. On top of that, you've got all the various black African militias, generally poorly trained, poorly armed. They get a bit of training from the Malian army, but considering the Malian army needs training, it's not so useful. Again, it's been my hope that these militias really don't wind up being deployed in any great numbers, because they go back about 20, 30 years and have very poor fighting records, but they are very good at killing civilians, which has been their main preoccupation in the past. And we have the African-led support mission, which has gone through a few convolutions so far and finally ended up being called AFISMA. This is a group of mainly West African troops drawn from the ECOWAS states, which you can see up there. Mali, of course, is part of ECOWAS, but most of these states, their militaries are not very capable, generally small, very poorly trained, politically questionable, and on top of that, they don't really have any communication systems they can use with each other, and in fact, some of them speak different languages, so trying to mold all these people into a single fighting force capable of taking on experienced desert fighters on their own terrain is really a bit of a political dream. And so far, none of these troops, many of them have arrived in Mali, but none of them have been deployed to the front lines. And the Western countries are actually talking about maybe another 9 months of training before they wind up in the front lines. My guess is you'll never see them come to much in Mali. This was meant to be the core of this African intervention force, the Nigerian military, once a very powerful group. But due to corruption and various other things over the last few years, they've just fallen apart. And just before the intervention started, the African Union commissioned a special report on their fighting abilities and came up with the conclusion that they're good for unloading stuff off trucks and guarding said trucks, but that's about it. Tremendous reversal in the power of the Nigerian military. Just give you an idea of some of the country up where the fighting is going on in Kidal. You have both flat areas and up in the mountains you have this tremendous rocky terrain. You see a few fighters there. They are exposing themselves now, but I think you can see from that photo, all they have to do is duck behind a few of those rocks and they're virtually indistinguishable from the rest of the terrain. Very dangerous place to be carrying out missions, especially when it's not your home turf. And in the cities that were supposed to have been secured, apparently they haven't. There are still suicide attacks going on. Fighters just coming out of nowhere. We should have been spotted by all the incredible number of surveillance aircraft going over northern Mali right now. But they're still mounting attacks in fairly large numbers on the main cities, Timbuktu, Gao, and Kidal.
Who are the guys in the foreground? You know, the guy doing his stylish sort of Glock 4K pose with a Kalashnikov and the guy with a jammed machine gun.
These are Malian troops.
Oh, lovely. Okay,
yes.
Point taken.
Yeah. Doing their best. So I hope that gave you a bit of a flavor of the conflict, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
All right. Actually, I'd have to say, one of the things I was looking at your last few slides was the small arms, because again, some of them were actually quite revealing. Can you go back
Yeah, sure.
on that thing?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, like, you heard my sarcastic remarks.
This one?
If you keep going back for a bit, when you get to the Malayan militias, oh, well, yeah, I thought his white gloves were a nice touch. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's got, you know, a Chinese Kalashnikov, so whoever armed them didn't waste much money on it.
No.
In fact, they got the sort of the cheapest Kalashnikov you can get, short of a Pakistani market special. And I keep going back to, I think the one about Chad, I thought was quite interesting. Yeah, that one, I mean, the Chadians really ripped the crap out of the Libyans in the 1980s.
Yes, they did.
When you said these guys are experts, I mean, they've been spending money on quality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you look at the Kalashnikov or the one in the center, that is really, I mean, there's an it's been reshaped with an ergonomically designed butt. He's got a holographic design over the receiver, as well as the new fiberglass magazines. I mean, someone has spent money on quality firearms.
This is the advantage of having your own oil industry.
Well, and someone has been smart enough just not to buy the usual stuff straight out of the crate for them either.
I'm sure they get some advice from the French, who still maintain a fairly large military mission in Chad.
Yeah, but they didn't buy French stuff.
No, no. In Africa, it's very rare for the militaries there to buy European or Western equipment. You get far better deals from the old Soviet countries who offer very good terms, and the stuff, while it's maybe not top quality such as the Western stuff, it's easily maintained, easily repaired if it breaks down.
Kills a lot of civilians, doesn't kill many soldiers.
Well, no, it's good as long as both the militaries fighting are equipped with the same stuff.
Well,
but of course, this gives an advantage, of course, to any Western force that winds up fighting.
What they're using there is pretty blinged up stuff that you generally don't see, and most of it is junk. Where you fire 50 meters, the bullet's tumbling. You know, they shoot an awful lot of civilians with this because there's no holding, aiming, or firing in it. Because literally, you can't take one of these knockoffs, get it wet at all, let it rust for a week, come back and actually hit something at 100 meters. They're not effective. So what it turns out to be, these things are extremely effective for clearing villages of civilians and not really for warfare.
Oh, and a large part of African warfare is clearing villages of civilians.
That is high. That's pretty high-tech gear. That's the highest tech gear I saw when I was in Africa.
And this is why they are one of the few capable militaries in Africa at the moment. Well equipped, well trained, very good at what they do.
But that's not Chinese junk.
Yes. Oh, you wanted to say?
No.
Well, I think historically speaking, there were lots of relationships between Algeria and Eastern Europe when at the time of Arab movement and after that in 1970s and 80s because of the cold relationships with Europe and France in particular after the independence. So not surprised, and I know that they continue to have relationships even today, but the communist bloc is no longer.
It's a very good point.
So through Algeria, a lot has been coming through.
Yes, and not only there, most of the senior staff in the Malian army are all Soviet trained.
Yes.
That explains it.
Andrew, you mentioned at one point that Algeria wants nothing to do with this particular dust-up, and that was news to me because I'd sort of been assuming that especially since Tigantarine, that the Algerians would be sort of playing silent partner to whatever the French were doing in the south. What is happening in southern Algeria, given that that's where the mountains up there is where the action is now taking place?
Not in southern Algeria.
Not in southern Algeria,
yes.
but right next to, right across
well,
the border.
their interests are mainly in securing the border. Algeria is one of the main points of their foreign policy is not interference in other states, and they, for the last few years, have been engaged in trying to secure the south of Algeria. Apparently, they weren't working quite fast enough, but their main idea is to try to control the system of wells in southern Algeria, to control the wells control the movement of people through the area. So they've been working a lot on that, restricting access. Now you need permits to go get water from some of these wells, which are constantly guarded by unfortunate garrisons of troops lined up in the middle of nowhere. They've tried to increase surveillance and that type of thing. But they don't want to get involved in the shooting aspect of the war. So, as you say, they have been a silent partner of the French. They've allowed French overflights of troops and military equipment to go down into Mali. But that's about as far as they're prepared to go for the moment. They're also very unwilling to work with the French. They're still angry at the French over the occupation, especially the Civil War and the War of Liberation after the Second World War. So many atrocities were carried on by both sides, to be honest, but there's still a lot of anger at the top level of the Algerian power structure towards France, and the idea of any kind of a joint Franco-Algerian military operation is really out of the question.
Does their security stance in the south act as any kind of an inhibitor to Al-QAEDA and allied movements?
It hasn't, unfortunately. I mean, Al-QAEDA launches a huge operation just a bit more than a year ago, about a year and a half ago, into southern Algeria. They had set up a brand new counterterrorism center at a city called Tamanrasset, a little oasis city. And it was about 6 different nations involved, and this was going to be the place where they were going to exchange intelligence and monitor the entire area and send their top people down there to monitor things. And well, Al-QAEDA just drove up to the front gate and rammed it with a truck full of explosives and blew the whole thing up. I mean, so much for monitoring the situation there. It was a complete failure. And, for one, I haven't really heard anything of this center in Tamanrasset first. I think it's pretty much been declared a complete failure at this point.
Yeah, I was thinking more about the past 6 months since the French intervention.
Yeah.
3 months.
I haven't seen evidence of any kind of penetration from Mali directly into the south. Mokhtar's operation was carried out from Libya, not from Mali.
We hear a lot about Chinese economic investments in Africa. Are they playing any kind of role in this conflict, or are any other non-African countries other than France taking any interest, pulling any strings?
There's a number of Western countries that are making very small contributions to the operations in Mali. Right now, there's been very little go on in northern Mali in terms of oil exploration or mineral exploration, mainly because of the lack of security. But it is believed that because it's right in proximity to similar uranium fields and oil fields in Niger next door, that there's very good likelihood that northern Mali will have some of these resources. And this is probably another reason why there's suddenly a great interest in controlling northern Mali, which nobody really expressed much interest in carrying on any kind of development in that area up till recent years. China's not really a big player in Mali yet, but if they get a chance, they would be. France, I think, at the moment is doing a bit of a pushback against the Chinese in West Africa and North Africa. The Chinese are able to go in and offer development assistance and aid and exploration and all this, basically no strings attached politically, whereas most of the Western nations expect some kind of development to go on, or that you shouldn't be corrupt and keep all the money for yourself, this kind of thing. The Chinese don't really worry about that. And it's made them very successful in North Africa and in many other parts of the world. So I wouldn't be surprised if this situation calms down. They will be sending people in to see what kind of deals they can make. But at the moment, you really can't run any kind of operations up there. And that might last for a few years yet.
If you look at religion, language, race, economics, and so on, is there any one common enemy that could pull some of this together? Because sometimes the common enemy is better than trying to work it out without an outside threat. I mean, what might pull some of these countries together?
I suppose if they got tired of the French, that but there are so many different agendas at work that, you know, I don't see much chance of that even. You know, everyone's got their own differences, and as I was explaining, even within the Tuareg community, some are very pro-French, some are against the French, some are in favor of the Bamako government, some are totally in favor of forming a separatist country. It's just within a single tribe. And you can multiply that by the number of tribes in Mali, and you begin to get an idea of the number of agendas at work here and the unlikelihood of ever getting everybody on the same page. But all you can ever hope for is some kind of simmering level of dissatisfaction. This may be the optimal state where people aren't actually killing each other, and I think that's pretty much what we had till about a year and a quarter ago. Yes.
I think, Madam
David, you wanted to say something?
No, well, I do, but you have a thought there. No, if I could take you back to the terrorist attack on the refinery.
Right.
I was a little bit out of the loop there, but of the timeline, was this as a result of the... Was this some fallout from the actions in Mali, or? And I thought he was killed in this incident.
No, MOKHTAR is still very much alive.
And he's now in southern Libya.
That's my guess.
What's the situation in southern Libya now? What's going on?
It's kind of an ungoverned state that's being controlled entirely by militias. And MOKHTAR was up there several times in the last couple of years, establishing contacts since the revolution with these militias. And it's supposed, and I think this is correct, that he has bases and contacts up in southern Libya now. This allowed him to mount the attack on the refinery without having, as was initially suggested, driven from his base in Mali up to the gas facility. As I pointed out on the CBC, that's the same as driving from here to Atlanta, except imagine there's no roads, no food, no water on the way. And exposed to surveillance all the time. So that was just impossible. So it's a near certainty that he established his separate group up in southern Libya that carried out this attack. Your main question was, is there a relation between that attack and the Mali conflict? I think the timing was opportune for MOKHTAR in that he had prepared this attack for 2 years. I mean, you don't carry out that kind of an attack overnight. You simply cannot plan it in a week and organize this and expect any degree of success. These kind of things, same with 9/11, was years in the planning. And all attacks of that type are planned long in advance. What happened was it had its day, it was supposed to go off, but unexpectedly the French intervened in northern Mali. So when it came time to make a statement about the purpose of this attack, it was very useful to, to tie it to the French intervention and say, this is our retaliation against the French. Well, in fact, the French weren't all that badly affected by this attack. The Algerians suffered a lot, and some of the oil companies that had investment in the plant suffered. But it wasn't what you would describe as a significant blow against France. I think that the real purpose of the terrorist attack was twofold. One, they wanted 100 prisoners released from Algerian prisons because the movement's been really under a lot of pressure from Algerian security forces, especially in the north of Algeria. They've lost a lot of people lately, so they needed these 100 fighters back. And the second purpose, as always with MOKHTAR, is money. There would have been a very large ransom demand. And he's been successful in getting, just gigantic ransoms from a number of Western countries, including Canada.
But he didn't make any money on this operation.
No, this one he
Except
lost
killed
money
a lot
on.
of people.
But it did, at the very least, it did reestablish his bona fides as an Islamist guerrilla commander, which had come into question with the rest of the movement for a while.
Natalie, est-ce que vous avez des questions?
Just a question on the government, though. I mean, the government didn't care about Westerners or hostages or anything.
No.
I think they sent a statement. We don't care who's there, we're going to come in and we're going to kill everybody.
Yeah.
That's their hostage rescue.
That's how the
plan.
Algerians deal with these questions.
So in fact, that was almost an opportunity for the state to make a statement that we're not going to tolerate it. If you try this, we're going to kill you all, we don't care.
And it also prevented MOKHTAR from refinancing his movement.
So it was actually smart.
Yeah, in that sense. You know, I cannot advocate.
No, there's no,
you know,
there's no.
not advocating what they did there at all. But you know, if you just kind of look at it coldly from that perspective, it did serve their interests in the long run.
I would suggest there won't be too many attacks in Algeria anymore.
Thank you. So I want to thank Dr. McGregor for his expose, because I think that by putting the emphasis on the human factor, showing how different the Berbers are from the Tuaregs in terms of the Berber being more ethnically engaged into their lifestyles versus the Tuaregs being more tribal in essence. Looking at Africans in Mali, for instance in Chad, who countries being also are very different, allowed us to understand better the complexity of the conflict, that it's not, you know, Islam versus African traditions and, you know, Christianity embedded in that, or that it's a nation state against another nation state, because there's no such thing. Like what you showed very clearly is that it is a mosaic of many different interests.
Yes.
Those interests
Precise.
are not necessarily religious interests versus you know, political interests. Political Islam with the Pakistanis, as you mentioned, and Al-QAEDA are not doing very well with the Tuaregs, because the Tuaregs have very different interests. They're more like trade people. They're in business. So for them, they control their land. And if the business is to be done with Al-QAEDA, they do it with Al-QAEDA. But when the French come over, and as you said, they can, you know, reverse their allegiance depending on who they want to deal with, just because they want to continue to control their land. They're more like lords or tribal people, I think. So by showing all these, I think we get a very clear understanding that the resolution of the conflict is probably, as you point towards, about, it's not that much ideological, you know, in terms of we have to get rid of political Islam, for instance. It's more in terms of appealing to enough sensitivities with all the players to try to bring them to some kind of solution where the egos are all satisfied one way or another, right? Because that's very much, I think, what transpires here when you look at the players. Now, there are economic interests, and I mean, I disagree with what you said about China. I think China has a string attached, and for them, you know, with their materialistic, you know, ideology, it's about making money. It's about putting a hold on the natural resources in Africa. But the French have a more ideological agenda, which is to revitalize their splendor as, you know, a colonial power, and to remain present in Western Africa and Black Africa and North Africa also. So we have different agendas here, different players, and I think that you showed that very well, and it was really, I think, enlightening in many ways, because you avoided the dichotomy, the dualism between, you know, one religion versus another, or an ideology versus another one, or, you know, the tribal nature of the Tuaregs against the nation state of, or the government of Mali. And then by avoiding that, you're showing the possibility, you know, and possibilities of dialogue and conflict resolution.
Yeah, you would hope such opportunities would present themselves. I mean, you do have a few things going for you in, say, in Mali. Nearly everyone is at least a Muslim. If they can, you know, start building on that instead of allowing, you know, foreign elements coming into the country and saying, well, okay, folks, all the way you practice Islam is wrong here, and we're going to cause a lot of trouble trying to convince you that you're wrong. You know, there are a few things to build on. Not a lot, but they've got to start somewhere.
They're not all Mali. If you look at the Dogon of Mali, for instance, in the Dogon of Mali, you know, they with their beliefs in extraterrestrial visitors, and
It's a bit of a hoax that, but yeah.
This is the old stuff, but it's still no. But I think that when you look at the religion of Mali, these Muslims are not the Wahhabists of Saudi Arabia, and they are not the Salafists of Pakistan. They are a different kind of Muslims. They're much milder. They are, I think they're pacifists in essence. They don't want conflicts and they don't want ideological conflicts. But they found themselves carried into this kind of conflict, and they try to resist the way the best way they can. I don't think that this is where they are not ideological in essence. They're not religious. It's not a religious war for them, right?
There's religious aspects to it, but it's not
Yeah,
it's not a war of
religious-
religion. Yeah.
Yes, yes. There's some religious aspects, but it's not a religious conflict per se. I would say, you know.
It's not like Sudan, where you had South Sudan having different religious beliefs
Yeah,
than
no,
the
it's
North.
very
It's a whole different thing.
So, I guess, sorry, actually the point is that the jihadist narrative, trying to transplant this into Mali didn't work either, which is also hopeful, because it means al-Qaeda's ability to export its ideological conflict, it is not automatic to every Islamic society, which is...
Oh, you're right there,
what I'm
John.
saying.
It's just like Somalia. The people voted with their feet. Most of the people in northern Mali are no longer in northern Mali. They're in Mauritania, they're in Algeria, they're in Burkina Faso, they're in Niger. They're waiting for this to be done, and they had zero interest in living under this Islamist administration. The only people that remained were those who were too poor or immobile to get out, and they hated it too. I mean, what was going on in the streets was just awful. You've had everyone just operating for hundreds or thousands of years a certain way, and then people show up and start cutting off hands and stoning people and whipping people, and
Are
intolerable.
they Sunni or are they Shia or are they?
No, there's no Shias in this region at all. They're
None,
all
so it's
Sunnis.
all-
Yeah,
all
they're all
Sunnis.
Sunnis. But I mean, that's not saying much, because within it's
Yeah.
like saying someone's a Protestant Christian.
No,
Well, you go,
I
what
understand.
kind,
No, I-
yeah. I mean,
understand, but
Sunniism
the
has
differences
so
are
many interpretations.
Radical at certain places. No, I just wondered which one was there.
We have time for a couple more
Yeah,
questions.
just a
Yes,
quick comment on whether there's any role, peripheral, what it might be, of Canada, whether it's from our bipolar, semi-isolationist government, or whether it's the boys from London, Ontario. There's a security issue on those, and of course there might be some type of Canadian involvement on the governmental level, the federal governmental level. Any comment at all on what Canada?
I think we have to work very hard to kind of uncover what these young fellows from London to go there. We have to find out who facilitated this. I doubt they came up with this idea themselves. It is possible to kind of self-radicalize at home, but at some point, if you want to become a real jihadist, other people have to become involved. And I think that's the network that needs to be uncovered. As far as Canada participating in a military intervention in Mali, I've kind of been against that from the start. I don't think that we have strategic interests in the area that would justify that kind of thing. And of course, as most people in this room know, we're just off a long, difficult deployment in Afghanistan, and maybe it's not the right time to jump into the new Afghanistan, which is what Mali might be for the next 10 years or so. If you look at the French, I think their thinking on this has become very pessimistic lately. When they began the intervention, they were going to be there for a month, and then they were going to be there till the end of March, and then it was the end of April, and then it was going to be the end of the year. And this week they announced that they're basically never leaving. So I don't think this speaks very well to the impressions of the French intelligence about just how long this war is going to last. I think their latest assessment is that this is going to be in for the long haul in this region. And France is completely capable of dealing with this. They have economic interests there that they're wanting to further. And I don't think Canada necessarily needs to be involved in furthering the economic interests of France in neo-colonial states in Africa. I just don't see a role for us in that.
We haven't done anything yet.
We-
Another country.
Short of the C-17.
Yeah, we sent a transporter.
Oh, there was
aircraft.
that.
That's about all.
Which is also flying elephants to some sanctuary out in California. So what vital national interest is that serving? So
Maybe they could deliver the elephants back to Africa. This would be a good opportunity.
yeah. Any more questions here as we approach 2 o'clock this afternoon? Wow. Andrew, thank you very much.
Well,
I enjoyed a number of things, and that was like a National Geographic tour de force of Africa. As you very well brought out the whole business of how multi-layered it is, and how we're we're always predisposed to wanting the quick 30-second wrap-up. What's it really mean to us? What's it mean to us as Canadians? So what? We all know that we have Canadian mining firms, especially in this city that has the largest mining exchange, I think, in the world. That we have these interests there from a business point of view. But what does it really mean to your average Canadian? I think your response to that is very valid. My question to you would be, you're off tomorrow back to Washington, and to what degree have you had the opportunity to advise Canadian decision makers about this? Can you share a little bit of that with us, Andrew?
I think we need better cooperation with groups such as Algerian intelligence. I think we had big problems with that from the very start. They weren't very forthcoming. In fact, they told a few tall tales that were just ridiculous to Canadian security agencies when they came calling. And I think with the nature of globalization and especially with the internet allowing people to become radicalized in almost any part of the world, I mean, even from the safety of your home in London, Ontario, you can start joining the Jihad. So this calls for a much greater deal of security and intelligence cooperation with states that are directly affected by these kind of Jihad activities. I think that's the most important thing that we can do at the moment, is just try to improve both our own capabilities in this area and to increase our cooperation with other states.
On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying thank you for listening to us today. Watch for announcements of future event transcripts, and we hope that you will be able to join us in person for our regular speakers events. Once again, thank you for tuning into our podcasts, and have a wonderful day.